Shalom. Hi, Paul, Fran, Elliot, Suanne, Debbie, Beth,
Morning.
Veronica. Good morning. Shabbat Shalom. Nechemya, Asher, Chaim, Richard, Chosid. Hi, everybody. Good to see you on this strange Shabbat morning. I only say strange because it feels like the world is turning again, as we discussed last night. Um, Okay, so we're going to screen share the bracha over Torah story, Torah. It is a story at this moment in time. Torah study, um, and Anna, if you could screen share that bracha, that would be great. And Elliot, would you like to recite the bracha this morning?
Sure. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivonu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen, amen. And here we are, grateful for the opportunity to study sacred words and Torah with one another, and may we gain some deep and practical insights on this Shabbat morning. Okay. Um, so this morning we're looking at the last parsha of the Torah, right, Vayechi, and we're going to be looking specifically at some of the last words of the Torah, of the parsha and of the book of Genesis, and reflecting on those and the interactions between Joseph's brothers and Joseph. And this is right after Yaakov dies and is buried in the land of Canaan because he did not want to be buried in Egypt. And what I want to do is take a pretty deep dive into the relationships between Joseph and his brothers, especially at this, juncture, um, and consider also the connection between the end of the book of Genesis and the beginning of Shmot, the beginning of Exodus. So that's our basic task. And I think here we go with no further ado. Can we get a PDF? Yes, you can. Let's see. Here's the link. I don't know if that's a PDF, but that is a link to the source sheet. And yeah, it's the link has been in the chat. Does that work, Beth?
Shabbat Shalom.
It going to Safari where someone hasn't made it into a PDF, you end up with this long, multi-page extravaganza.
Oh,
Where
okay.
some of
Anna,
these-
can you make it into a PDF and
Yeah.
then share it? Is that possible at this point, Anna?
Yes, I will try to do that and report back.
Okay, thank you so much. If it's not possible, then we'll just set it up for next time. Sorry about that, Beth. Thank you for clarifying. I didn't realize that. Okay, here we go. I am going to share my screen. Oops. Okay. Oh, Fran, so good to see you here. Oh my God. Great to have a Bible professor in this Zoom room. Okay. So first, I want to go back a little bit. So we're considering, as I just said, for people who just stepped in, we're considering and exploring the relationship between Joseph and his brothers. And before this parsha, right, there was this moment of forgiveness. And if you remember, Joseph tortured his brothers before they realized who he was, right? He sent them back and forth, back to Canaan, and they went back to Egypt because of the famine. And he said, I want your little brother to show up. And then he was going to imprison Benjamin. And, there's lots of drama. And then Judah came forward with his famous speech. And then Joseph kind of turned. And that's where I just want to remind us about that moment. So I'll read it. I'll read the first passage in Hebrew and English. Vayomer Yosef el Achav, Geshu na Elai. Vayigashu, Vayomer, Ani Yosef achichem, asher
Ani
mechartem
Yosef.
oti mitzrayma. So Joseph said to his brothers, come forward to me, or approach. And when they approached, he said, I am your brother Joseph, he whom you sold into Egypt. So that's an incredibly dramatic moment. Va'ata, and now, al te'atzvuv, al yichar be'enechem ki mechartem oti hena, ki l'michya shalachani Elohim lifnechem. So now, don't be distressed or don't be grievous, and don't let it be sort of bad in your eyes that you sold me, hither. I don't know. It was to save life that God sent me ahead of you. So this is really interesting because now Joseph is all forgiving. But I think we wouldn't have had those chapters of his vindication if he wasn't sort of still traumatized and enraged about what they did. So, but now it's like, there's a bigger picture. Don't worry about it. It's okay. Ki zesh natayim hara'av b'kerav ha'aretz v'od chamesh shanim asher ein charish v'katzir. It is now 2 years that there has been famine in the land, and there are still 5 years to come in which there shall be no yield from tilling. So now he's giving them the bigger picture of famine and abundance. So that he can make clear his own mission and all this. Vayishlachani, sorry, I can't see the vowel. Vayishlacheni Elohim lefnechem lasum lachem she'erit ba'aretz ulachayot lachem lepleita dola. God has sent me ahead of you to ensure your survival on earth and to save your lives in an extraordinary deliverance. So if this wasn't true, which it seems to be from the narrative, you think that Joseph had, delusions of grandeur, right? That's a big, big mission. Va'ata lo atem shlachtem oti hena ki halohim v'yasimeni la'av leFaro ula'adon l'chol beito u'moshel b'chol eretz Mitzrayim. So it's not you who sent me here, but God. So no matter what you did to me, a bigger purpose has come through it. And he made me a father, or God made me a father to Pharaoh, lord of all his household, and ruler over the whole land of Egypt. Maharu va'alu el aviv, amartem elav, ko amar bincha Yosef. Samani Elohim la'adon l'chol Mitzrayim, rida elai al ta'amod. Now hurry back to my father and say to him, thus says your son Joseph, God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me without delay. So that's the background, right? That's the forgiveness moment where Joseph, gives this sort of wide frame of understanding what happened to him and saying, don't worry about this. No matter what you did to me, really God was behind it. Okay. So now let's go to our Parsha, and this is literally, it's almost the end of the Parsha, and we'll look at the end of the Parsha itself in a few moments. So this is right after Jacob is buried. Vayashav Yosef Mitzrayimah, hu ve'achav v'kol ha'olim ito l'kbor et aviv, acharei kavro et aviv. After burying his father, Joseph returned to Egypt, he and his brothers, and all who had gone up with him to bury his father. Vayar'u achei Yosef ki met avihem. Vayomru lo yistemenu Yosef. V'hashev yashiv lanu et kol hara'a asher gamalnu oto. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, what if Joseph still bears a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrong that we did him? Okay, so there's something about Jacob's death, their father's death, that's making them very nervous. Somehow they've lost their protection and they don't really trust Joseph. And what they did to him is still on their minds. Like, they're still carrying the guilt, even if Joseph is not carrying the anger. And it's unclear if Joseph is carrying the anger or not, right? We don't see it, but we did, again, see it in all those chapters of revenge. There was something else I wanted to say, but I forget what it was. It's okay. It'll come back. Okay. So they're scared. Somehow they feel like the score hasn't been settled, right? Still on their minds, they're still carrying it. Vayitzavu el Yosef lemor. So they sent this message to Joseph. Avicha siva lifnei moto lemor. Before his death, your father left this instruction. Ko tamru Yosef, ana sana pesha achecha v'chatatam ki ra'a gimalucha v'ata sana lefesha avdei Elohei avicha vayivch Yosef b'dabram elav. So shall you say to Joseph, forgive, I urge you, the offense and guilt of your brothers who treated you so harshly. Therefore, please forgive the offense of the servants of the God of your father. And Joseph was in tears as they spoke to him. So let's look at Rashi for a moment. On your father did command. They altered the facts. Shinu vadavar mipnei hashalom, for the sake of peace. For Jacob had given them no such command, because Joseph was not suspect in his sight. Lo nechashad Yosef be'einav. I'm sorry. Ki lo tziva Yaakov ken, shelo nechashad Yosef be'einav. So what Rashi's saying here is they're making this up for the sake of peace, or I would say because they're scared. They're totally scared and they don't trust Joseph. And Rashi's saying because Jacob never said such a thing, and certainly it's not in the narrative, right? We don't know what happens behind the scenes, because Jacob trusted Joseph, right? Joseph was not suspect in Jacob's eyes. So that's interesting. So really what is going on with the brothers here? Is there like duplicity, more duplicity and deception? Okay. 18. Vayelchu gam echav, vayiplu lefanav, vayomru, hinenu lecha la'avadim. That's a really interesting verse. His brothers went to him themselves, flung themselves before him and said, we are prepared to be your slaves. See, here Joseph is crying, and then they have this strange reaction, right? They fling themselves before him saying, we're prepared to serve you. We're prepared to enslave ourselves to you. What is going on here? Vayomar alehem Yosef, al tira'u, ki hatachat Elohim ani. So Joseph said to them, have no fear. Am I a substitute for God? So Joseph doesn't seem to want this slave-master relationship. 20. Va'atem chashavtam alai ra'a Elohim chashava l'tova l'man aseh kayom hazeh. Sorry, let me see if I can make it bigger. Kayom hazeh l'chayot amrav. So Joseph says, have no fear. Am I a substitute for God? Besides, although you intend me harm, God intended it for good. So finally, he's acknowledging in words that they did intend evil, but God intended it for good so as to bring about the present results, the survival of many people. And then he says further, Va'ata al tira'u anochi achalkel elchem ve'etapchem v'yinachem otam v'yidaber el al libam. And so fear not, I will sustain you and your children. Thus he reassured them, speaking kindly to them. Okay, so, hold on, one more thing. I want to look at the Malbim, and then I'll open things up for our group consideration. Okay, so from here, so the Malbim is responding to perhaps Yosef will bear animosity towards us, and saying that, quoting Proverbs, saying that the greatest revenge one can take upon their enemy is to repay their hatred by placing them among those who sit at the aggrieved table, and to do only goodness and kindness to him or to her. So in other words, if you have an enemy and you're really, they've wronged you, then what you should do to make them suffer is to treat them kindly. For then they will constantly remember what they had done wrong. And that is why the next verse says, for you are stoking coals on his head. This is the next verse in Proverbs. And Joseph's brothers sensed this, and the goodness of Joseph was like he was stoking coals on their heads. So they said, if only Joseph would clearly bear animosity towards. In other words, they wanted Joseph to get angry at them, right? It's like, I can't take this kindness anymore. I can't take that you're saving our lives when we threatened yours and almost killed you. And if so, he will return to us all of the evil that we have done him. Let him be actively bad to us and not kind, which is like being stabbed with a sword. Actually, I'm going to do one more from Sadok HaKohen, and then we'll open it up. So I just think these comments are really, really interesting and kind of go deep into the psychology between the brothers and the guilt that the brothers, seem to still be carrying. The distress that a person feels over the sins which he has done are actually the pangs of hell for that sin. Wow. Therefore, they said in the Talmud, Brachot 12b, that one who is ashamed of it is forgiven, for he already suffered the punishment of hell. And one who is meritorious is constantly reminded of the sins he did and ruminates about them until he suffers in this world the portion of hell that was due to him. And this is the payment extracted from the tzaddikim, from the righteous ones in this world. So perhaps, the brothers, if we sort of go according to Rav Tzadok HaKohen here, they're still in that hell. They're not ready to be forgiven, even if Joseph keeps taking the high road. And, if we're going to sort of go according to the Malbim, that high road is actually causing them more pain, not less. Okay, I'm going to stop my share. I see some hands, or I see Lori Wolko. Good morning, Shabbat Shalom. You can unmute yourself.
Good morning. So what I wanted to say is what I love is noticing that there's a process going on here. And I think that, forgiveness and that whole, the whole back and forth is part of the process. And it seems like maybe such a simple and obvious thing, but I think sometimes, either people think they can bypass it, or they don't even think there needs to be words going back and forth. But as long as there's some talking going on, and this is an opportunity, and there's hope that things can be resolved. If there's no talking, if there's or only one side is in the game, it can never, be resolved. So I just love, I just love that the Torah is showing us the process, showing us the process that each party is kind of moving in. And I think, sometimes we kind of have to fake it till we make it. And maybe, Joseph is doing a little bit of that. But I just love that they didn't just jump into forgiveness, because it doesn't work that way.
Even though it seems like Joseph did jump into forgiveness, but he didn't. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And again, I think it's a process, because I think sometimes we want to be there, right? Because we want to be at that elevated level of forgiveness. And so sometimes you have to, sometimes you don't even realize how you're feeling. Like you might say, you might say something, but on some level, the brothers knew that, on some level, the brothers knew that. And so I'm look, some people would just take the words, right? So some people would just say, oh, great, Joseph is over it, and now the conversation is over. But that's what I mean, that I love that, the brothers are conscious that it's a process, because they're going through a process.
Yeah, great. And I can relate to being a person, wanting to be a person who takes the high road, but not really always having forgiveness in my heart. The forgiveness not being honest. When are we really ready to forgive?
Yeah,
Okay.
Exactly. But it's a process. Yeah.
Thank you, Lori. Okay, Paul, Fran, and Ronnie.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you.
Shabbat Shalom, Paul.
It seems that the theme of deception continues here, because Jacob did not say that. Jacob should have said that, which is another item of note about Jacob's personality and lack of understanding about the dynamics between his brothers. I think it's odd that Joseph uses the phrase, "Am I a substitute for God?" which seems a strange thing to say in that situation, but he seems to have a compulsion to identify himself with God. So perhaps it's germane to his character. And then just one last thing. The language seems different here. It's more precise, it's more involved. It just seems different in how the language is used.
Yeah. So Paul, I think you're right on about that. That until Genesis 37, pretty much the language of the Torah, if you think about the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, really terse, right? It's like a little says a lot, and then suddenly this kind of novella, this Joseph novella from 37 till 50, has a whole different quality of storytelling. Like things get sort of detailed and flowery and kind of opened up. So yeah, absolutely. Okay, Fran, Ronnie, Roberta, and then I know at the towards the end we'll get Nehemiah.
We find out in the book of Joshua, I think it's chapter 24, that Joseph's remains are buried in Shechem.
Ah.
And that sends us back to Genesis 34 and the rape of Dinah. I think it's always possible, I like to anyway, to have a political analysis of these stories. Jacob is a smart cookie. He knows how to negotiate in the real world, and so does Joseph. Joseph is in some ways Jacob's son par excellence. His political skills are unlike maybe anyone else in the entire Torah. So if you go back to Genesis 34, it's kind of an object lesson in Jacob and his sons. In other words, we know exactly who they are, especially Simeon and Levi, who are the full brothers of Dinah, the woman who was assaulted. And so when when the brothers come forward to Joseph, Joseph always also comes forward to them. And he doesn't have to say, I know who you guys are. Once he finds out that his father is alive, that's what really makes him weep. He's so relieved to find out that his father is still alive. But from then on in, he has to manage these brothers. He needs to politically assume his power, not only over Egypt, but over his family. And I think that that's what's going on. He knows who he's dealing with. They don't know who they're dealing with. That's the irony. That's almost the funny part of the story, is the brothers' ignorance as to what they have fallen into, their own pit, so to speak.
Yeah, like Joseph is kind of a puppeteer of his family and of Egypt and of Pharaoh, right? He's pulling all the strings. And I love that you brought in Shechem, because the other connection to Shechem, which I don't really know how to say in English, Shechem, I don't know, is that Jacob sent Joseph to see his brothers shepherding in Shechem, and that's when they threw him into the pit. So it's the site of much evil, right? So it's interesting that Joseph is buried in Shechem. That's fascinating, right? And through all this, with Joseph's power, Judah ultimately, right, is the one whose line assumes the kingship and ultimate redemption.
And if I may add, I think that's because the change that Judah undergoes is really profound, and he undergoes it because of his own personal pain, and that gives him empathy for pain of others.
Yeah. And two more quick comments. One is, so if you look, and I know the people who were in my Moses class last year, we discussed this. So if you look at Genesis connected to Exodus, Joseph is a shepherd who enters the king's palace, and Moses grows up in the king's palace and becomes a shepherd.
Oh, nice.
And Moses is the one who frees his people. There's something about going from power not to powerlessness, but to that more modest leadership that seems important in the Torah and powerful. Okay, great. Thank you so much, Fran. Okay, Ronnie.
Shabbat shalom, everybody.
Hello.
I have a few things to say. I hope I can put it together. I want to pick up on something Paul said. I think the brothers are still operating with alternative facts. There has not really been a transformation of the brothers. And there is, in their meeting up again, it seems to me, also a conflict for Joseph. He's regressed in a certain way. Part of him seems to want to torture them and get some revenge. And perhaps he has to move through that in order to forgive them. But he's full of hubris as well. I mean, it's his dream has come true, right? The brothers are bowing down before him. And he says, I'm Lord over all of Egypt. I'm Lord over Pharaoh.
Nice.
And then he backs off and says, am I a substitute for God? Well, in some sense, it's as if he feels almost that he is, or at least in the sense that he has control over part of the narrative. And as far as the brothers being so paranoid, I think there's a deep psychological truth here about needing punishment before we can accept being forgiven, something like that.
Yeah, and my question is, yes, Ronnie, I think you're so right, which is how long? How long? If to go back to Lori's point, if there's no process in a family, a child and an adult can spend their lives suffering.
Dance, right.
If there's no process, if there's no way to work out the conflict, whatever way that is. Yeah, how long? And it's really interesting, and we're going to get to this, that it's at this juncture that the children of Israel go into slavery. And they're now asking, we want to be slaves. We want to be slaves to you. It's so interesting. If you just talk about literarily, psychologically, karmically, they're asking to be slaves. And then the next thing you know it, they're slaves. Wow. Okay, Roberta.
Yeah.
Go back to the text. If anyone else wants to speak, I'm going to put you on the next.
Shabbat shalom, everybody.
Shalom, Roberta.
Just streaming right from what Ronnie and Rabbi Dan, what you're just sharing. At first, I felt real aversion for the Torah from the Hasidic Rebbes, well, from the Malbim and then from Reb Tzadok HaKohen. I'm like, oh, what is that? And just thinking about it.
You didn't like their comments?
Yeah, for there to be real transformation.
Yeah.
We do need to actually feel the impact on other people of what we have done. And we're seeing this and the discomfort of it in our world today. It's like, as a Jew, I don't really want to face that my ancestors came here and benefited from white supremacy. I don't want to feel that. I want to feel like, no, that wasn't us. I mean, it's like, we have to feel this to really go for the transformation.
Yeah, you want to feel like we took the high road, right?
I don't hear you. Oh, wait a minute.
What?
I didn't hear you, Rabbi Dan. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I'm just echoing what you're saying. It's like, yeah, we'd like to look back and say we took the high road, right?
Yeah, and just one little more piece, that this is exactly what coming out of victimhood means, that, oh, I had agency in this situation. What I do matters. What I do has impact. And it's the opposite of where his brothers go. Oh, no, we want to be your slave. And that's not what he's saying. And so I sort of got, this is why the tradition considers this flawed human a tzaddik.
Okay, are you sitting with Alana Klugman?
Yes.
Oh my God, because I see the person in Alana Klugman's box gesturing just the way you are, and I couldn't figure out who was with Alana, but now I know.
We're in Woodstock. And it's the first time we've ever been together, and it's through this chevra. Thank you,
Oh my God, that's wonderful. So I thought one of the comments said, but I think they didn't say, maybe I have it somewhere else, that it's easier to become a slave. Like it's easier to let someone have emotional power over you than to feel the complexity of your own actions. Like if you think about who has power over you, I think that's really indicative. Like where do you hand your power over? Where is it that we don't want to understand who we are, and it's easier to have someone else be in control, right? It's just it's something, since I was studying this in preparation for this session, something I've really been reflecting on. Like where do we hand over our control and don't want the complexity of our own power? Oh my God, I see more hands. What am I going to do? Okay, I promise that we're going back to the text. So I'm going to try to stick to my own structure. And everyone keep your hands up. And also I saw Michael, who I've never seen before, had their hand up. So Michael, come back. Just wait a few minutes. We're going to do some more texts. And I'll get back to everybody. And if you can create a little lineup in the chat, that would be helpful. Okay, so we're going to share our screen. Okay, here we go. Okay, so we did this. Okay, so I want to look at the end of the book of Genesis. Hold on one second. Okay, here it is. Okay, Vayeshev Yosef b'Mitzrayim hu veit aviv vayechi Yosef mea ve'eser shanim. So Joseph and his father's household remained in Egypt. Joseph lived 110 years. Nice long life. Vayar Yosef le'Ephraim b'nei Shileshim gam b'nei Machir ben Menashe Yuldu al Birkei Yosef. Joseph lived to see children of the third generation of Ephraim. Beautiful. The children of Machir, son of Menashe, were likewise born upon Joseph's knees. So like a good, long, fruitful life. Vayomer Yosef el achav, Anochi met ve'Elohim, pakod yufkod etchem ve'hele elchem min ha'aretz hazot, el ha'aretz asher nishba Avraham li'Yitzchak u'Yaakov. At length Joseph said to his brothers, I'm about to die. God will surely take notice of you and bring you up from this land to the land that he promised on oath to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. Vayishba Yosef et bnei Yisrael lemor V'kod yifkod Elohim etchem v'halitem et atzmotai mizah. So Joseph made the sons of Israel swear, saying, when God has taken notice of you, you shall carry up my bones from here. Vayamat Yosef ben Me'ah ve'eser shanim, vayichantu oto vayisem ba'aron b'Mitzrayim. So Joseph died at the age of 110 years, and he was embalmed and placed in a coffin in Egypt. So I just want to point out that's really interesting that we end the book of Genesis in darkness. And I think this goes back to Paul's point, that there's still duplicity here, there's still deception here, there's still brothers not trusting each other. And I know Rabbi Ingber has taught very often how the book of Exodus is a tikkun, a repair on the relationship between brothers and sisters, because Moses, Miriam, and Aaron, for whatever issues they've had issues, right? Moments of conflict and just different dynamics and pain, but they are siblings who cooperate. And Moses could not have done it without Aaron, and certainly could not have done it without Miriam, who saves his life at the very beginning. And I want to say something else. So the face-to-face relationship between God and human beings in this book of the Torah is fraught, right? If you see God's face, you will die, right? It says that in a number of places. But I will also say that the face-to-face relationship between human beings is also fraught, and especially in this book of Genesis. And what deception means is that the family, the Israelite family, the members could not really face one another. And perhaps that's a residue from the Akedah, right? Because the trauma of Isaac looking up into his father's face, Abraham about to kill him with the knife poised, Like you can only imagine what that did to Isaac's psyche and also soma, body, and how that trauma was translated into generation after generation. And then we have deception again and again, right? And danger. Human relationships in the book of Genesis means danger. Okay. So we end the book of Genesis in darkness, Vayesem ba'aron b'Mitzrayim. And I just want to contrast that for a moment to the very end of Exodus. Because in the end of Exodus, freedom and basically slavery, freedom, being freed, standing at Sinai, building the sanctuary, we end with over the tabernacle a cloud of the Lord rested by day, and fire would appear in it by night, in the view of all the house of Israel throughout their journeys. Ki anan Adonai al mishkan yomam ve'esh tiyeh laila bo le'enei kol be'Yisrael b'chol masehem. We end with vision. And I had a colleague, a friend, and a teacher, Rabbi Jim Diamond, who was killed tragically in a car accident. I don't know when, maybe 10 years ago. It wasn't, whatever. Who was in the process of writing a book about last verses of books and how significant they are. And if you look, they are incredibly significant. So Genesis ends in darkness, and Exodus ends in light. And the Torah itself, the 5 books, end in light. But we're not going to go there now. Okay, so I am going to stop my share. Hold on, I just want to see what text we didn't look at. Okay, we're good. Okay. All right, so did we lose the Michael person? We did. Jay, I see your hand. No? Okay, Jay, go ahead. You're Michael. You're pointing yourself. You can unmute and speak. Okay, so here we go. Let's see. Did Anna give me a... Okay, I'll just say the lineup right now.
I was Michael.
You were Michael. Okay, good. I was excited to hear a new voice. And if any people have not spoken here, I'd love to hear your voices. Jay, Alana, Asher Chaim, Alana, Richard. And Alana, that must be Alana, not Roberta, right? Okay, good. Okay, let's go.
Hi, Shabbat Shalom. I have, I guess, 3 questions. One, in terms of that amazing analysis about forgiveness as a form of punishment, might that not also apply to Esau, how he treated Jacob?
Well, it's not forgiveness as a form, it's kindness.
Oh, kindness. Well,
Yeah.
kindness, you're right.
Yeah.
Esau he had the fear, and Esau, just like the brothers, but Esau treated him kindly, I think. So it's sort of a parallel incident in my view.
Saying Esau was too nice to Jacob.
Yeah, he was very kind to Jacob.
First he wanted, that's interesting.
Yeah. Second of the 3, just now, the end of Breshit. You talk about darkness, but I also think you talked about deceit continuing. And I think, is it because he didn't trust them and he made them swear? Was that the concern there? I didn't quite understand your point about the very end, or that he was embalmed and that's darkness. I don't know quite what you meant.
2 things. The deceit. So there's a kind of relational darkness, which is not what I said, but I'll say it now, because the brothers, we think, and the commentators think, are lying to Joseph by saying, oh, your father, No,
I get that. But at the very end of the book, when you pointed out that that last part of the book, that darkness and deceit is there. And I was wondering whether it's because Joseph didn't trust his brothers and made them swear.
Oh, no, I was saying that the darkness is because we end the book of Genesis in a coffin. And the deceit was the earlier point.
Ah, okay. Because also, Joseph, who was not suspect, Jacob made him swear that he would bury him. So if you think the demand to swear and to promise with an oath is a lack of trust in a way, then that also was not only Joseph and his brothers, but Jacob and Joseph. And the last point, and this is what I waited, and if anybody I'm sure this has been analyzed, and if offline somebody could let me know where this might be. In terms of transition from Genesis to Exodus, already towards the end of Genesis, there's all this playing with Jacob and Israel, Jacob and Israel, Jacob and Israel.
Yeah.
It keeps shifting.
Yes. Right.
And then in the very beginning of Exodus, there is some of that, but then the new Pharaoh who did not know Jacob calls us Israel. Boom, and that's it. And that's always fascinated me. And that ambiguity that then gets resolved in the very beginning of Exodus. So I'm just wondering if anybody's written about that.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I'll add, which is not addressing your point, because I never thought about your point before, which is whatever, worth paying attention to, is that I looked up in the concordance today the word or the verb for slavery in the Joseph story. So from chapter 37 to chapter 50, as far as I could count, that verb occurs 44 times. And as we know in a previous parsha, Joseph actually enslaves the entire Egyptian population through giving them food or bartering for food with their very land, their livestock, and then ultimately their lives, right? So there's a lot going on with slavery at the end of Genesis. Okay, so now we have Alana, Asher Chaim, Alana, Richard Chusid, and Aluma.
Boker Tov.
Okay,
I wanted to go back to Ronnie's mention of the dream and the ways in which that dream of the 17-year-old Joseph is and isn't enacted. And I'm going back to something that Aviva Zornberg had pointed out, that in that dream, what is missing is, and she said this is sort of like the heart of the unconscious of Yosef, is that when he dreams the dream, his mother has died. So there's no way that this dream can ever really be enacted because she's died. So I was thinking about the end then of the story. And Yosef is the one who could bring forward the mother. If we want to consider in the story that the mother represents Shekhinah or compassion or connectedness or nurturance or love, that so she's otherwise missing, which allows him potentially to shift the ancestral trauma and embody the energy of the lost mother. And so what I'm also thinking about is when I read the blessings that you so beautifully opened up last night of Jacob to his various sons. I included it in a poem this week. I'll just read it. This is from the Torah. He blesses Yosef with imagery of the mother. He says,
yes, that's incredible.
And Shaddai, which means, holy breasts, and Shaddai, who blesses you with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that crouches below, blessings of the breast and womb. So to me, it evokes right at this moment, some way in which Jacob is encouraging Yosef, or sees in Yosef that capacity to embody the lost mother, or the mother, or the divine mother in some way. And his blessing is a request that he bring that forward.
Wow, that's a great Dvar Torah. I love it. And I will say that not only is Rachel lost, but women, except for Potiphar's wife, from chapter 37 to 44 are lost. Women are not basically in the Joseph marries somebody, yes, but women are there are no female actors, right? They're Joseph's brothers. What happened to Dinah? Who knows? So thank you. That was beautiful, gorgeous. Thank you. Asher Chaim.
Wow. Tough act to follow. I have to try to pull my thoughts together again. Yasher Koach, Bod Harav, for igniting all of this, and for everyone who's chipped in. It's brilliant Torah this morning from all corners. And I do appreciate your efforts to rehabilitate Yosef, even though Yosef at the end of his life perhaps reflecting the trauma of his earliest experiences where his father loved him, but he was powerless. His brothers throw him in the pit, the powerless first chapter of his life. When he does get power, he doesn't know what to do with it. And he's always asking, am I in God's place? I sure wish I were. Pharaoh has dreams. God will answer them. Tell them to me. All of this wrestling with whether he feels comfortable playing God, and he certainly does. But when his father dies, 12 years after the famine ends, and I think this was Chazoni's insight, Joseph realizes he doesn't have power. The famine's over. He's already a footnote, and he has to ask someone in Pharaoh's inner circle, please, please, my father made me promise, please give me permission to bury him in the ancestral burial place.
Ooh, that's interesting.
And Pharaoh says, sure, go bury your father, but I'm going to send soldiers along to make sure you don't try to do anything funny while you're away. So they're already captives.
That's fascinating. Fascinating. So we see again and again the seeds of slavery in these chapters.
Oh, I think they're already slaves by the time, but by the time of the funeral, yeah.
Yeah. That's really interesting. Also, I didn't know I was trying to rehabilitate Joseph. Is that what I'm doing today?
No, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I'm just
in
curious.
The past few sessions, you have said things that make him more humane.
I see. Humanize, not rehabilitate. Okay.
Okay. Sorry.
No, that's okay. All right. Did you get?
But on another level, he realizes but doesn't realize how little power that he has.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Ashkayim. Yeah.
At the end, I think his real rehabilitation is he doesn't say, please bury me right away, but rather insists on becoming a time capsule so that the people will always remember we're supposed to leave here. This is not where we belong.
Yeah.
And
although sad, I'm sorry, go ahead, finish your sentence.
Circling back, that we keep in our prayers a return to Zion, even though in today's reality, it's very difficult to conceive why American Jews would not just continue to celebrate the fact that we're spread all over the world.
Right.
And yet, Pakod Yifkol Elohim etchem.
Yeah, I think it's amazing that he wants to be buried not in Egypt and Canaan, although, that Fran reminded us that he's buried in Shechem, I find a little sad and depressing. So both, right? Okay, Alana.
But maybe he feels he doesn't deserve to be buried in Machpelah.
Well, he doesn't ask to be buried in Shechem. How does he end up there?
Joshua?
That's what, I don't know. It's a good question. Okay, Alana. Alana, I met your father this week.
Oh, yes, I heard.
Oh my God, he looks just like you. It was amazing. It's nothing like the Metro Diner.
Yeah, I know. It brings everybody together. So speaking of fathers, I wanted to go back to the point that you made about the brothers losing confidence when the father dies.
Yeah.
And how like the father kind of holding, or a parent holding more than the kids are ready to hold themselves, and sort of that concept of the giving of power to the father to hold the healing of the relationship, where he's healed, but then not actually doing the work of themselves of healing and forgiving. And
wait, hold on. Someone's unmuted. Someone's unmuted. Just everybody mute yourselves except for Alana, please. Thank you. Go ahead.
And they don't do the healing, and then the insecurity that comes up when the father dies, and why all of a sudden I thought that was just so interesting, and some tie into the slavery, into that sense of that I don't want to face myself and face the pain or the thing that I did, so I'm asking you just to punish me or to do something for me, as opposed to doing the work and having a process. Yeah. I just that really resonated, and the idea also of like, I mean, it's that inner work, and then what somebody said also around the managing the family, and that what does it mean that these characters are problematic. I mean, going back to the blessings that Alana talked about, like the blessings that the other brothers are getting are pretty horrible.
Oh
So
my
like, no
God.
wonder they lose confidence when their father dies. They've just been told by their dying patriarch that they're terrible people who deserve
Ah,
all these terrible things. So then why would they, in their relationship with somebody maybe who's in a leadership role in the family, believe that they're going to be seen differently? And also, like, why is that? I was just sort of, why was that the blessing that was given to? It was almost like a curse for almost every brother.
yeah. I talked about this last night.
Okay.
Some of them do read like curses. Um, Briefly, my thesis last night, or what I offered, is that this is the first family, right? The Jacob's children, unlike Abraham's children and Isaac's children, like no one's exiled here. He's got to hold them as they are and bless them as opposed to exile them. So he holds their genuine sins and problematic, parts of them and names them and yet holds them in the family, in the people. They are each one of them tribes with a role and a destiny.
So he's really seeing each of them as they are.
Exactly.
And valuing them for, I mean, that's a nice reading, but like, where's I just think like sort of the action that follows afterwards might undermine it, like, or the impact of that, of being told your destiny rather than discovering your destiny for yourself. And I think that idea of power or powerlessness, of what does it mean to be told what you are versus understanding, and then maybe sort of what you were getting at in the next book, where the family, they save each other, but they also go on a journey together. And so they discover for themselves kind of their own relationship and what that is versus being told what you are.
So here's the question, for me at least. When is it that you feel seen because other people are naming what they see? And when are you just being told who you are? That's number one.
Yeah.
Two, I would say I will, and maybe we'll go into this next week, I don't know yet, that the family, like Genesis is a failed project. Like it's not enough to be a family. You need to be a people. And as long as they're just a family, there's going to be duplicity and power relationship. Like we needed to be enslaved and to be liberated and to stand at Sinai and to have, 613 like practices of being, for becoming human and kind and free. Like this is it's just not working. So we had to go into the book of nationhood. Okay, that's my theory on that. Okay, Richard Husid, Aluma, and then Nehemiah.
Boker Tov and Shabbat Shalom. I want to build a little bit on Asher Chaim's statement about, in a sense, he's not glad, but the observation that Joseph is buried in Egypt, and that the Israelites were, in a sense, or Joseph's family were already slaves by the time of that event. It's interesting to think about Joseph's coffin. He was embalmed. There's only one other mention of that coffin in Torah, and that's the last thing Moses does before leaving Mitzrayim is to get the coffin back and put it on a cart, presumably, and carry it along.
Yeah.
And then from then on, we don't hear about that until Joshua buries him in Canaan. So for 40 years, this coffin is rattling along in the desert, and nobody mentions it.
Mm-hmm. Well, the Midrash mentions it, but yes.
I understand, but it's amazing that symbolism of Joseph, dead Joseph, being carried across the desert for 40 years. What does that mean? Does it mean a reminder of the continuing slavery, which is certainly present in some ways, in many ways in Exodus? Is it a reminder of family reconciliation and the hope for it, but it's dead? What does it remind the Israelites of? The constant presence of Joseph's bones through 40 years and through the rest of the Torah story. It's actually a reminder.
Love that question.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, I don't want to be facile of that. I want to go away and think about it. It's a great question. Thank you.
Right. But it's
what does it
all
mean?
the stories in Genesis, in a sense, get replayed constantly. The failure, the success. as the Israelites are wandering around for 40 years. I find the presence of that coffin a remarkable something or other, symbol, reminder
Yeah,
of
I think
what we've just finished talking about in the book of
and
Genesis.
yeah, having that reminder of where we come from. Okay,
Right.
Aluma. where'd you
Wow,
go?
my mind has so shifted. There's so many comments going on that I'm not even sure what to pick up on. And I know we don't have enough time. So I guess,
We have a few minutes. We have a couple minutes.
okay. So one thing is the constant carrying around of this coffin, I find amazing. I never even recognized that. But the constant carrying around of the coffin, I mean, Joseph, it's not just the coffin. It is a coffin, it's death. But there's also, Joseph is about generativity, you know, and to carry this around because they haven't settled yet and they have to be reminded of generativity and integration because I think someone tapped on it, maybe it was Alana, but many Midrashim and even Jill Hammer and a lot of her followers believe that Joseph was a non-binary person and holds that option. And so to carry that around until we really get it. I didn't recognize that. Yeah, I didn't recognize that he was buried in Shechem, which to me is amazing because that's where he actually began his transformation. And so to bury someone where they began to transform,
Beautiful.
that's like a totally new.
So he's buried where he was thrown into the pit.
Yes.
That's amazing. And maybe that pit becomes his ultimate burial place.
Exactly.
Wow.
And another thing I was thinking of was a lot of people, you know, really put Joseph down. I'm not one of them. And I feel like the comment of, am I God? Yeah, that does sound kind of grandiose. But what about that whole Hasidic thing? We all carry God within us. So was Joseph not just acting out of that God spark that we all have, but at least he was connected to? There's so much anger and judgment around Joseph that I think it's really, really unfortunate. I think he's a great archetype for us to really dive into and look at a little bit differently. And there's so much more, but I'll stop.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel like Joseph's a deeply human character, and I think there are moments of deep growth. And you know, I'm sure Nehemiah, who will speak in a couple minutes, will talk about how the tradition holds Yosef as a tzaddik, right, as a real righteous person. And to me, he's just ever complex. But the fact that he did transform, you know, I hold that in high esteem. And I often think about Joseph in the pit and then in the prison. A friend of mine, Rabbi Sharon Konanisfeld, who couldn't be here today, but you all know my chavruta, sent me a midrash about Joseph representing the depths and then Yehuda representing the rope that one throws into the depths to draw water. Isn't that beautiful?
That's amazing.
Amazing.
That's amazing and deep. And Joseph is also Yesod. I mean, so think about it.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to ask Beth and Fran to be really quick with their comments and end with Nehemiah, and we'll just go 2 or 3 minutes over. So everybody just, be as concise as possible now.
With regard to the Aron, we also find in the book of Exodus that the Israelites are toting an Aron around for years and years and years. And that's the Aron that contains the
Torah.
The Torah.
And the Midrash says, right? Why, to your point, Richard, why are we carrying around the ark with Joseph's bones in it? Because next to the ark for the Aron, for the Torah, why? Because the one who is buried in this, I'm just trying to remember the Midrash, in this ark, the one who's in it, fulfilled what was written in that ark. Isn't that beautiful? It's amazing. So thank you, Beth, for reminding me of that Midrash and bringing that up. Okay, Fran.
In addition to what Beth just said, there is another midrash in which they're about to leave Egypt, and everybody's scurrying around and they need to get out fast. And then somebody says, Joseph's bones. Where are Joseph's bones? We can't find Joseph's bones. They're hysterical about Joseph's bones, and they finally have to go to Sarah bat Asher, who's how many years old, and she says, "Oh well, they're at the bottom of the Nile, and they have to get them up, and it's a feat of magic for them to retrieve Joseph, whom they have forgotten about."
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful midrash about going to the timeless figure of the daughter of Asher, Sarah, who carries us through all the generations, and we go to her when we need to know something like, where is Joseph buried? And she tells Moshe, and Moshe says, Joseph, this is the moment. If you don't come up now, we're going to leave